Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Woo! How are you guys? Are you feeling cozy with my setup tonight? We're gonna be reading more stories from the Blue Fairy book, and hopefully, I get less tongue-tied this time. I got the ambience music from Pixabay or Pixabay. I don't know how to read their site, but yeah, I credited everything that I have here, like from the glasses to the book to the background, down in the description below. If you're curious about anything that I have here and anything that you hear here, check it out. I guess I don't really have anything much to say aside from that. I'll just start with the reading. Should I? Shall we? Let's go. Oh, by the way, this story that we're going to start with is The Little Red Riding Hood. I'm pretty sure, like, all of us is familiar with the story, but I'm still gonna read it anyway. Because this is like ye olden version. So sit back, relax, and everything. Yeah. Have a warm tea, snuggle up close to your bed or couch, have a blanket over you. Yeah. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there lived a certain village. There lived in a certain village a little country girl. Already messed up the first sentence. Anyway, the prettiest creature was ever seen. Her mother was excessively fond of her, and her grandmother doted on her still. And her grandmother doted on her still more. This good woman got made for her a little red riding hood, which became the girl so extremely well that everybody called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother, having made some custards, said to her, "Go on, my dear, and see how thy grandmamma does, for I hear she has been very ill. Carry her a custard and this little pot of butter." Little Red Riding Hood set out immediately to go to her grandmother, who lived in another village. As she was going through the wood, she met with Gaffer Wolf, who had a very great mind to eat her up, but he durst not, because of some makers hard by in the forest. They have the F word here, and I feel like I shouldn't say it. Where am I? He asked her whither she was going. The poor child, who did not know that it was dangerous to stay and hear a wolf talk, said to him, "I am going to see my grandmamma, and carry her a custard and a little pot of butter from my mamma." "Does she live far off?" said the wolf. "Oh, ay," answered Little Red Riding Hood. "It is beyond that mill you see there, at the first house in the village." "Well," said the fox, "and I'll go and see her too." "I'll go this way and you go that," and we shall see who will be there soonest." The wolf began to run as fast as he could, taking the nearest way, and the little girl went by that farthest about, diverting herself in gathering nuts, running after butterflies, and making nosegays of such little flowers as she met with. The wolf was not long before he got to the old woman's house. He knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" "Your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood," replied the fox. Counterfeiting her voice, "Who has brought you a custard and a little pot of butter sent by Mamma?" The good grandmother, who was in bed because she was somewhat ill, cried out, "Pull the bobbin, and the latch will go up." The wolf pulled the bobbin, and the door opened, and then presently he fell upon the good woman and ate her up in a moment, for it was above 3 days that he had not touched a bit. He then shut the door and went into the grandmother's bed, expecting Little Red Riding Hood, who came some time afterwards and knocked at the door. Tap, tap. "Who's there?" Little Red Riding Hood, hearing the big voice of the wolf, was at first afraid. Oh, that's big voice. Let me redo that. "Who's there?" But believing her grandmother had got a cold and was hoarse, answered, "'Tis your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood, who has brought you a custard and little pot of butter Mamma sends you." The wolf cried out to her, softening his voice as much as he could, "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the bobbin and the door opened. The wolf, seeing her come in, said to her, hiding himself under the bedclothes, "Put the custard and the little pot of butter upon the stool, and come and lie down with me." Little Red Riding Hood undressed herself and went into bed, where, being greatly amazed to see how her grandmother looked in her night clothes, she said to her, "Grandmamma, what great arms you have got!" "That is to better hug thee, my dear." "Grandmamma, what great legs you have!" "That is to run the better, my child." "Grandmamma, what great ears you have got!" "That is to hear the better, my child." "Grandmamma, what great eyes you've got!" "It is to see the better, my child." "Grandmamma, what great teeth you've got!" "That is to eat thee up." And saying these words, the wicked wolf fell upon Little Red Riding Hood and ate her up. The end. Joke. Oh wait, what? That was the end. Oh my god. I didn't know this version ended like that. Usually there's like a huntsman, woodcutter, who comes to the rescue, but I guess this one does not end happily ever after. Next story. Oh, I think this one is like a version of Sleeping Beauty. This might be a bit longer too, compared to the first one. The title of this story is The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. There were formerly a king and a queen who were sorry that they had no children. So sorry that it cannot be expressed. They went all the waters in the world, vows, pilgrimages, and all ways were tried, and all to no purpose. At last, however, the queen had a daughter. There was a very fine christening, and the princess had for her godmothers all the fairies they could find in the whole kingdom. They found 7. That every one of them might give her a gift, as was the custom of fairies in those days. By this means, the princess had all the perfections imaginable. After the ceremonies of the christening were over, all the company returned to the king's palace, where was prepared a great feast for the fairies. There was placed before every one of them a magnificent cover with a case of massive gold, wherein were a spoon, knife, and fork, and all of pure gold set with diamonds and rubies. But as they were all sitting down at the table, they saw come into the hall a very old fairy, whom they had not invited, because it was about 50 years since she had been out of a certain tower, and she was believed to be either dead or enchanted. The king ordered her a cover, but could not furnish her with the case of gold as the others, because they had 7 only made for the 7 fairies. The old fairy fancied she was slighted, and muttered some threats between her teeth. One of the young fairies who sat by her overheard how she grumbled, and judging that she might give the little princess some unlucky gift, she was, as soon as they rose from table, and hid herself behind the hangings, that she might speak last, and repair as much as she could the evil which the old fairy might intend. This is a bit difficult to read because the sentences are so weird. In the meanwhile, all the fairies began to give their gifts to the princess. The youngest gave her gift that she should be the most beautiful person in the world. The next that should have the wit of an angel. The third that she should have a wonderful grace in everything she did. The fourth that she should have danced perfectly well. The fifth that she should sing like a nightingale. And the sixth that she should play all kinds of music to the utmost perfection. The old fairy's turn coming next, with a head shaking more with spite than age. She said that the princess should have her hand pierced with a spindle and die of that wound. This terrible gift made the whole company tremble, and everybody fell a-crying. At this instant the young fairy came out from behind the hangings, and spake these words aloud. Assure yourselves, O king and queen, that your daughter shall not die of this disaster. It is true, I have no power to undo entirely what my elder has done. The princess shall indeed pierce her hand with a spindle, but, instead of dying, she shall only fall into a profound sleep, which shall last 100 years, at the expiration of which a king's son shall come and wake her up. The king, to avoid the misfortune foretold by the old fairy, caused immediately to proclaim to proclamation to be made. Caused immediately proclamation to be made, whereby everybody was forbidden on pain of death to spin with a distaff and spindle, or to have so much as any spindle in their houses. About 15 or 16 years later, the king and the queen being gone to one of their houses of pleasures, the young princess happened one day to divert herself in running up and down the palace. When going up from one apartment to another, she came into a little room on top of the tower, where a good old woman alone was spinning with her spindle. This good woman had never heard of the king's proclamation against spindles. "What are you doing here, goody?" said the princess. "I am spinning, my pretty child," said the old woman, who did not know who she was. "Huh," said the princess, "this is very pretty. How do you do it? Give it to me, that I may see if I can do so." She had no sooner taken it into her hand than, whether being very hasty at it, somewhat unhandy, or that the decree of the fairy had so ordained it, it ran into her hand, and she fell down in a swoon. The good old woman, not knowing very well what to do in this affair, cried out for help. People came in from every quarter in the great numbers. They threw water upon the princess' face, unlaced her, struck her in the palms of her hands, and rubbed her temples with Hungary water. But nothing could bring her to herself. And now the king, who came up at the noise, bethought himself of the prediction of the fairies, and judging very well that this must necessarily come to pass, since the fairy said it, caused the princess to be carried into the finest apartment in his palace, and to be laid upon a bed all embroidered with gold and silver. One would have taken her for a little angel, she was so very beautiful, for her swooning away had not diminished one bit of her complexion. Her cheeks were carnation, and her lips were coral. Indeed, her eyes were shut, but she was heard to breathe softly, which satisfied those about her that she was not dead. The king commanded that they should not disturb her, but let her sleep quietly till her hour of waking was come. The good fairy, who had saved her life by condemning her to a sleep of 100 years, was in the kingdom of Matakin, 12,000 leagues off, when this accident befell the princess. But she was instantly informed of it by a little dwarf who had boots of 7 leagues, that is, boots in which he could tread over 7 leagues of ground in one stride. The fairy came away immediately, and she arrived about an hour after, in a fiery chariot drawn by dragons. The king handed her out of the chariot, and she approved everything he had done. But she had very great foresight, and she thought when the princess should awake she might not know what to do with herself, being all alone in this old palace. And this was what she did. She touched with her wand everything in the palace, except the king and the queen, governesses, maids of honor, ladies of the bedchamber, gentlemen, officers, stewards, cooks, undercooks, scullions, guards, and their befaitors, pages, footmen. She likewise touched all the horses which were in stables, as well as pads as others, the great dogs in the outward court, and pretty little Mopsies too, the princess's little spaniel, which lay by her on bed. Immediately upon her touching them, they all fell asleep, that they may not wake up before their mistress, and that they might not be ready to wait upon her when she wanted them. The very spits at the fairy, the very spits at the fire, as full as they could hold of partridges and pheasants, did fell asleep also. All this was done in a moment. Fairies are not long in doing their business. And now the king and the queen, having kissed their dear child without waking her, went out. Hello! This is already the second story. I finished reading Red Riding Hood because it was a very short read, and the version that I read did not end happily. Let's just keep it at that. Anyways, right now I'm reading a version of The Sleeping Beauty, which is called The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. Well, the wolf is alive. Anyway, where was I? Okay. Having kissed their dear child without waking her, went out of the palace and put forth a proclamation that nobody should dare come near it. This, however, was not necessary, for in a quarter of an hour's time there grew up all round about the park such as a vast number of trees, great and small, bushes and brambles, twining one within another, that neither man nor beast could pass through, so that nothing could be seen but the very top of the towers of the palace, and that too not unless it was a good way off. Nobody doubted but the fairy gave her in a very extraordinary sample of her art, that the princess, while she continued sleeping, might not have nothing to fear from any curious people. When 100 years were gone and past, the son of the king then reigning, and who was another family from that of the sleeping princess, being gone a-hunting on the side of the country, asked, what those towers were which he saw in the middle of the great thick wood? Everyone answered according as they had heard. Some said that it was a ruinous old castle haunted by spirits. Others that all sorcerers and witches of the country kept there their Sabbath or night's meeting. The common opinion was that an ogre lived there, and that he carried thither all the little children he could catch, that he might eat them up at his leisure, without anybody being able to follow him, as having himself only the power to pass through the wood. The prince was at a stand, not knowing what to believe, when a very aged countryman spake to him thus: May it please your royal highness, it is now about 50 years since I heard from my father, who heard from my grandmother, say that there was then in this castle a princess, the most beautiful was ever seen, that she must sleep there 100 years, and she should be waked by a king's son, for whom she was reserved. The young prince was all on fire at these words, believing without weighing the matter that he could put an end to this rare adventure, and, pushed on by love and honor, resolved that moment to look into it. Scarce had he advanced towards the wood when all the great trees and bushes and brambles gave way of themselves to let him pass through. He walked up to the castle, which he saw at the end of a large avenue, which he went into, and what a little surprised him was that he saw none of his people could follow him, because the trees closed again as soon as he had passed through them. However, he did not cease from continuing his way. A young and amorous prince is always valiant. He came into a spacious outward court, where everything he saw might have frozen up the most fearless person with horror. There reigned over all a most frightful silence. The image of death everywhere showed itself, and there was nothing to be seen but stretched out bodies of men and animals, all seeming to be dead. He, however, very well knew, by the ruby faces and pimpled noses of the beefeaters, that they were only asleep, and their goblets, wherein still remained some drops of wine, showed plainly that they fell asleep in their cups. He then crossed a court paved with marble, went up the stairs, and came into the guard chamber, where the guards were standing in their ranks, with their muskets upon their shoulders, and snoring as loud as they could. After that, he went through several rooms full of gentlemen and ladies, all asleep, some standing, others sitting. At last he came into a chamber, all gilded with gold, where he saw upon a bed, the curtains of which were all open, the finest sight was ever beheld. A princess, who appeared to be about 15 or 16 years of age, and whose bright and, in a manner, resplendent beauty had somewhat in it divine. I'm so confused. Old language, why you speak like that? He approached with trembling and admiration. He fell down before her upon his knees. And now, as the enchantment was at an end, the princess awaked, and looking unto him with eyes more tender than the first view might seem to admit of. "Is it you, my prince?" she said to him. "You have waited a long while." The prince, charmed with these words, and much more with the manner in which they were spoken, knew not how to show his joy and gratitude. He assured her that he loved her better than he did himself. Their discourse was not well connected. They did weep more than talk. Less eloquence, a great deal of love. He was more at a loss than she, and we need not wonder at it. She had time to think on what to say to him, for it is very probable, though history mentions nothing of it, that the good fairy, during so long a sleep, had given her very agreeable dreams. In short, they talked 4 hours together, and yet they said not half of what they had to say. In the meanwhile, all the palace awaked. everyone thought upon their particular business. And as all of them were not in love as wait, let me repeat that. And as all of them were not in love, they were ready to die for hunger. The chief lady of honor, being as sharp as other folks, grew very impatient and told the princess aloud that supper was served up. The prince helped the princess to rise. She was entirely dressed and very magnificently, but His Royal Highness took care not to tell her that she was dressed like his great-grandmother, and had a point band peeping over a high collar. She looked not a bit the less charming and beautiful for all that. They went into the great hall of looking-glasses, where they supped and were served by the princess's officers. The violins and hautboys played old tunes, but very excellent, though it was now above 100 years since they had played. And after supper, without losing any time, the Lord Almoner married them in the chapel of the castle, and the chief lady of honor drew the curtains. They had but very little sleep. The princess had no occasion. I don't understand what I'm reading. And the prince left her the next morning to return into the city, where his father must needs have been in pain for him. The prince told him that he lost his way in the forest as he was hunting, and that he had lain in the cottage of a charcoal burner, who gave him cheese and brown bread. The king, his father, who was a good man, believed him, but his mother could not be persuaded it was true, and seeing that he went almost every day a-hunting, and that he always had some excuse ready for doing so, though he had lain out 3 or 4 nights together, she began to suspect that he was married, for he lived with the princess above 2 whole years, and had by her 2 children, the eldest of which, who was a daughter, was named Morning, and the youngest, who was a son, they called Day. These names! They should have gone with Aurora. Because he was a great deal handsomer and more beautiful than his sister. Oof! The queen spoke several times to her son, to inform herself after what matter he did pass his time, and that in this he ought in duty to satisfy her. But he never dared to trust her with his secret. He feared her, though he loved her, for she was of the race of the ogres, and the king would never have married her, had it not been for her vast riches. It was even whispered about the court that she had ogreish inclinations, and that whenever she saw little children passing by, she had all the difficulty in the world to avoid falling upon them. And so the prince would never tell her one word. But when the king was dead, which happened about 2 years afterwards, and he saw himself lord and master, he openly declared his marriage, and he went in great ceremony to conduct his queen to the palace. They made a magnificent entry into the capital city, she riding between her 2 children. Soon after, the king went to make war with the emperor Contalabute, his neighbor. He left the government of the kingdom to the queen, his mother, and earnestly recommended to her care his wife and children. He was obliged to continue his expedition all the summer, and as soon as he departed, the queen mother sent her daughter-in-law to a country house among the woods, that she might with the more ease gratify her horrible longing. Some few days afterwards, she went thither herself, and said to her clerk of the kitchen, "I have a mind to eat little morning for my dinner tomorrow." "Ah, madam," cried the clerk of the kitchen, "I will have it so," replied the queen, and this she spoke in tone of an ogre who had strong desire to eat fresh meat. "Grandma, that's your grandchild. Cannibalism, no, no." I don't know this version of the Sleeping Beauty. Anyway, "and we'll eat her with sauce Robert," whatever that is. The poor man, knowing very well that he must not play tricks with ogresses, took his great knife and went up into little Morning's chamber. She was then 4 years old. Yeah. And came up to him jumping and laughing, to take him about the neck and ask him for some sugar candy. Upon which he began to weep. The great knife fell out of his hand, and he went into the backyard and killed a little lamb and dressed it with such good sauce that his mistress assured him she had never eaten anything so good in her life. He had at the same time taken up little Morning and carried her to his wife to conceal her in the lodging he had at the bottom of the courtyard. About 8 days afterwards, the wicked queen said to the clerk of the kitchen, "I will sup upon little Day." He answered not a word, being resolved to cheat her as he had done before. He went to find out little Day, and saw him with a little foil in his hand, with which he was fencing with a great monkey. The child being then only 3 years of age. He took him up in his arms and carried him to his wife, that she might conceal him in her chamber along with his sister, and in the room of little Day cooked up a young kid, very tender, which the ogre found to be wonderfully good. Ayo, what? For Morning he killed a lamb, but for Day he killed another child? Or is a kid like another term for another animal? Oh my god. Anyway, this was hither almighty one. Goat? Oh, is that what you call a young goat? A kid? But one evening this wicked queen said to her clerk of the kitchen, "Oh, okay, I thought another kid was, offered up." Anyway, "I will eat the queen with the same sauce I had with her children." It was now that the poor clerk of the kitchen despaired of being able to deceive her. The young queen was turned of 20, not reckoning the 100 years she had been asleep. And how to find in the yard a beast so firm was what puzzled him. I am puzzled as well. He took then a resolution that he might save his own life, to cut the queen's throat, and going up into her chamber, with intent to do it at once, he put himself into as great fury as he could possibly, and came into the young queen's room with his dagger in his hand. He would not, however, surprise her, but told her with great deal of respect the orders he had received from the queen mother. Do it, do it, she said, stretching out her neck. Execute your orders, and then I shall go and see my children, my poor children, whom I so much and so tenderly loved. For she thought them dead ever since they had been taken away without her knowledge. No, no, madam, cried the poor clerk of the kitchen, all in tears. You shall not die, and yet you shall see your children again. But then you must go home with me to my lodgings, where I have concealed them, and I shall deceive the queen once more by giving her in your stead a young hind. This what you call this kitchen chief guy, he should have been the one to, marry the princess and not the princess's distant relative. Upon this, he forthwith conducted her with his chamber, where leaving her to embrace her children and cry along with them, he went and dressed a young hind, which the queen had her supper, and devoured it with the same appetite as if it had been the young queen. Exceedingly she was delighted with her cruelty, and she had invented a story to tell the king. At his return, how the mad wolves had eaten up the queen, his wife, and her 2 children. One evening, as she was, according to her custom, rambling round about the courts and yards of the palace to see if she could smell any fresh meat, she heard, in a ground room, little Day crying. Little Day crying, for his mamma was going to whip him because he had been naughty. And she heard at the same time little Morning begging pardon for her brother. The ogress presently knew that the voice of the queen and her children, and being quite mad that she had been thus deceived, she commanded next morning by break of day, which with a most horrible voice, which made everybody tremble, that they should bring into the middle of the great court a large tub, which she caused to be filled with toads, vipers, snakes, and all sorts of serpents, in order to have thrown into it the queen and her children, the clerk of the kitchen, his wife, and maid. Oh wait, let me repeat that. In order to have thrown into it the queen and her children, the clerk of the kitchen, his wife, and maid, all whom she had given orders should be brought thither with their hands tied behind them. They were brought accordingly, and the executioners were just going to throw them into the tub, when the king, who was not so soon expected, entered the court on horseback, for he came post, and asked, with the utmost astonishment, what was the meaning of the horrible spectacle. No one dared to tell him, when the ogress, all enraged to see what had happened, threw herself head foremost into the tub, and was instantly devoured by the ugly creatures she had ordered to be thrown into it for others. The king could not but be very sorry, for she was his mother, but he soon comforted himself with his beautiful wife and pretty children. I guess that was a good story. I think it's a bit of a mixture of the Snow White story. I remember that the huntsman who was supposed to kill Snow White also did. He killed the lamb, and the lamb's heart was what he offered to the queen to say that Snow White died. And that's what it reminded me of. I'm sorry if my reading was confusing, but the sentences were also confusing. Anyway, what happened was the king and queen of 100 years ago couldn't have children, and they did everything they could. But a miracle happened, and then they were blessed with a daughter. And since she was like the miracle that they've been waiting for, they prepared a grand feast and everything, and invited all the fairies they could find so that they could bless their daughter. And it just so happened that they missed out one old fairy because they thought she was either dead or like enchanted. And since they didn't prepare anything for her, since she wasn't invited, she got offended and cursed the child. But then one fairy was smart and reserved her blessing for last so that she could counter it a bit. Yeah. And then 100 years later, a prince comes to the tower, wakes up the princess, and then marries and makes a family with her. But he keeps it in secret from his parents, especially his mother, because his mother is an ogre, and the king only married the queen because she was rich. And when the king died, the prince took the throne, and then he proclaimed that he was married and has children, and they were brought to his kingdom, which I think was actually his wife's kingdom, because everyone but her parents were put to sleep. So I guess the reason why was because so that they could still govern over their kingdom, because only the palace where the sleeping beauty was sleeping, she and the people in there were the only ones who were put into sleep, while the villagers and the king and the queen, they stayed awake and aged and all that. Yeah, I guess this is one of the oldest versions because I didn't know there was an ogre in the story. I thought the only enemy was the wicked fairy. But yeah, so the king later on uh, went to war with the neighboring empire. And in his absence, the ogre queen mother decided that she would eat her grandchildren and her daughter in law. But then the chief kitchen man protected them, lied, and everything. And when she found out she was deceived, she was going to have them all executed. But the king came back just in time, and like in one version of Sleeping Snow White, the evil queen got so mad that she kind of stomped herself into death on fire something something. And also Rumpelstiltskin, like he was so mad, he like stomped so hard he fell through the floor and was never seen again. But this time, this queen just got so mad that she threw herself into the pit. Yeah, you don't know that version? There's a version where the evil queen of Snow White killed her. Not really killed, like she just got so mad that she started like walking on something that was hot, and that's how she died. I forgot the details. And then Rumpelstiltskin, I know that that's how the Rumpelstiltskin story usually ends. He stomps himself to disappearance. Yeah, I guess that's like the other version. Or maybe, maybe I made that up. Maybe I'm misremembering. Anyway, the third story is also another classic. This is titled Cinderella or the Little Glass Slipper. Why or? Let me drink a water. Some water. Why ah? I'm starting to have confusing English na rin because of the typography of this storybook. Okay, third story. Cinderella or the Little Glass Slipper. Once there was a gentleman who married for his second wife. Ah, makes sense. Yeah. The proudest and most haughty woman that was ever seen. She had, by a former husband, 2 daughters of her own humor, who were, indeed, exactly like her in all things. He had likewise, by another wife, a young daughter, but of unparalleled coolness and sweetness of temper, which she took from her mother, who was the best creature in the world. No sooner were the ceremonies of the wedding over, but the mother-in-law began to show herself in her true colors. She could not bear the good qualities of this pretty girl, and the less because they made her own daughters appear the more odious. She employed her in the meanest work of the home. She scoured the dishes, tables, etc., and rubbed madmen's chambers, and those of Mrs. her daughters. She lay up in a sorry garret upon a wretched straw bed, while her sisters lay in fine rooms, with floors all inlaid, upon beds of the very newest fashion, and where they had looking glasses so large that they might see themselves at their full length from head to toe. The poor girl bore all patiently, and dared not tell her father, who would have rattled her off, for his wife governed him entirely. When she had done her work, she used to go to the chimney corner, and sit down among cinders and ashes, which made her commonly be called Cinder Wench by the youngest, who was not so rude and unveiled as the eldest, who called her Cinderella. However, Cinderella, notwithstanding her mean apparel, was 100 times handsomer than her sisters, though they were always dressed very richly. I think from a merchant family, because his father always goes like to board a ship to trade with something, and either he comes back late or he passes away because of a shipwreck. That's what I remember, like the versions I've read. It happened that the king's son gave a ball, and invited all persons of fashion to it. Our young misses were also invited, for they cut a very grand figure among the quality. They were mightily delighted at the invitation, and wonderfully busy in choosing out such gowns, petticoats, and head-clothes as might become them. This was new trouble to Cinderella, for it was she who ironed her sister's linen and plaited their ruffles. They talked all day of nothing but how they should be dressed. For my part, said the eldest, I will wear my red velvet suit with French trimming. And I, said the youngest, shall have my usual petticoat, but then, to make amends for that, I will put on my gold-flowered manteau and my diamond stomacher, which is far from being the most ordinary one in the world. They sent for the best tirewoman. They sent for the best tirewoman they could get to make up their headdresses and adjust their double pinners, and they had their red brushes and patches from Mademoiselle La Poche. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Cinderella, likewise, called up to them to be consulted in all these matters, for she had excellent notions, and advised them always for the best, nay, and offered her services to dress their heads, which they were very willing she should do. As she was doing this, they said to her, Cinderella, would you not be glad to go to the ball? Alas, said she, you only jeer me. It is not for such as I am to go thither. Thou art in the right of it, replied they. It would make the people laugh to see a cinder wench at the ball. Anyone but Cinderella would have dressed their heads awry, but she was very good and dressed them perfectly well. They were almost 2 days without eating, so much they were transported with joy. Hello! It's nice to meet you, Mary Justice. I'm reading Cinderella right now. This is like an old version though, so I don't know how it will go. They broke above a dozen of laces in trying to be laced up close, that they might have a fine slender shape. Yeah. And they continually at their looking glass. At last the happy Let me read that again. At last the happy day came. They went to the court, and Cinderella followed them with her eyes as long as she could. And when she had lost sight of them, she fell a-crying. Her godmother, who saw all in tears, asked her what was the matter. I wish I could. She was not able to speak the rest, being interrupted by her tears and sobbing. This godmother of hers, who was a fairy, said to her, Thou wishest thou couldst go to the ball? Is it not so? Yes, cried Cinderella, with a great sigh. Well, said her godmother, be but a good girl, and I will contrive that thou shalt go. Then she took her into her chamber, and said to her, Run into the garden, and bring me a pumpkin. Cinderella went immediately to gather the finest she could get, and brought it to her godmother. Not being able to imagine how this pumpkin could make her go to the ball. Her godmother scooped out all the inside of it, having left nothing but the rind. Which done, she struck it with her wand, and the pumpkin was instantly turned into a fine coach. I'm trying my best not to get tongue-tied. Also, I get confused because some of the sentences are quite like old style, so the sentences don't sound proper to me. Wait, I got lost. Ah, there we go. Gilded all over with gold, She then went to look into her mousetraps, where she found 6 mice, all alive, and ordered Cinderella to lift up a little the trap door, when giving each mouse, as it went out, a little tap with her wand. The mouse was that moment turned into a fine horse, which altogether made a very fine set of 6 horses of a beautiful mouse-colored dapple gray. Being at a loss for a coachman, "I will go and see," says Cinderella. "If there is never a rat in the rat trap, we may make a coachman out of him." "Thou art in the right," replied her godmother. "Go and look." Cinderella brought the trap to her, and in it there were 3 huge rats. The fairy made choice of one of the 3 which had the largest beard, and having touched him with her wand, he was turned into a fat, jolly coachman, who had the smartest whiskers eyes ever beheld. After that, she said to her, "Go again into the garden, and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me." She had no sooner done so, but her godmother turned them into 6 footmen, who skipped up immediately behind the coach. With her liveries all bedaubed. I don't know these words. Oops. Do you guys hear that? There were motorcycles passing by. Anyway, bedaubed with gold and silver, and clung as close behind each other as if they had done nothing else their whole lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "Oh, okay. I'm always worried that the sounds of the motorcycles can be picked up. But yeah, that's good." Well, you see here, and wait, what is this word? Equipage? An equipage fit to go to the ball with, or you are not pleased with it? "Oh yes," cried she, "but I must go thither as I am, in these nasty rags." Her godmother only touched her with her wand, and at the same instant her clothes were turned into cloth of gold and silver, all beset with jewels. My hobby? I like to draw and animate. I made some streams of me drawing and animating. Check it out on my channel. I also like reading, which is why I'm doing this now. This done, she gave her a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the whole world. Being thus decked out, she got up into her coach, but her godmother, above all things, commanded her not to stay till after midnight, telling her, at the same time, that if she stayed one moment longer, the coachman would be a pumpkin again. The coach would be a pumpkin again, the horses mice, her coachman a rat, her footmen lizards, and her clothes become just as they were before. Oh, okay. Thank you for informing me. She promised her godmother she would not fail of leaving the ball before midnight. And then away she drives, scarce able to contain herself for joy. The king's son, who was told that a great princess whom nobody knew was come, ran out to receive her. Thank you! I'm glad you like my channel. He gave her his hand, and as she alighted out of the coach, and led her into the hall among all the company, There was immediately a profound silence. They left off dancing, and the violins ceased to play. So attentive was everyone to contemplate the singular beauties of the unknown newcomer. Nothing was then heard but a confused noise of, "Ha! How handsome she is! Ha! How handsome she is!" The king himself, old as he was, could not help watching her, and telling the queen softly that it was a long time since he had seen so beautiful and lovely a creature. All the ladies were busied in considering her clothes and headdress, that they might have some made next day after the same pattern, provided they could meet with such fine materials as able hands could make them. The king's son conducted her to the most honorable seat, and afterwards took her out to dance with him. She danced so very gracefully that they all more and more admired her. A fine collation was served up, whereof the young prince ate not a morsel, so intently was he busy in gazing on her. She went and sat down by her sisters, showing them 1,000 civilities, giving them part of the oranges and citrons which the prince had presented her with, which very much surprised them, for they did not know her. While Cinderella was thus amusing her sisters, she heard the clock strike 11 3/4, whereupon she immediately made a curtsy to the company and hastened away as fast as she could. Being got home, she ran to seek out her godmother, and after having thanked her, she said she could not but heartily wish she might go next day to the ball, because the king's son had desired her. As she was eagerly telling her godmother whatever had passed at the ball, her two sisters knocked at the door, which Cinderella ran and opened. "How long have you stayed? Oh, wait, how long you have stayed?" cried she, gaping, rubbing her eyes, and stretching herself as if she had just waked out of her sleep. She had not, however, any manner of inclination to sleep since they went from home. Old sentences are really confusing. "If thou hadst been at the ball," says one of the sisters, "thou wouldst not have been tired with it. There came thither the finest princess, the most beautiful ever was seen with mortal eyes. She showed us 1,000 civilities and gave us oranges and citrons." Cinderella seemed very indifferent in the matter. I'm also trying to read slowly, but I end up sounding like a robot stuttering, I think. And you might get even more confused if I read it slowly. But yeah, anyway, I'm trying my best. I hope you guys are enjoying. Thank you. I will. Indeed, she asked them the name of that princess, but they told her they did not know, and that the king's son was very uneasy on her account and would give all the world to know who she was. At this, Cinderella, smiling, replied, "She must, then, be very beautiful indeed. How happy you have been! Could not I see her? Ah, dear Miss Charlotte, do lend me your yellow suit of clothes, which you wear every day." "Ay, to be sure," cried Miss Charlotte. Lend my clothes to such a dirty cinder wench as thou art. I should be a fool. Cinderella indeed expected well a such answer, and was very glad of the refusal, for she would have been sadly put to it if her sister had lent her what she asked for jestingly. The next day the two sisters were at the ball, and so was Cinderella, but dressed more magnificently than before. The king's son was always by her, and never ceased his compliments and kind speeches to her, to whom all this was so far from being tiresome that she quite forgot what her godmother had recommended to her, so that she at last counted the clock striking 12 when she took it to be no more than 11. She then rose up and fled as nimble as a deer. The prince followed, but could not overtake her. She left behind one of her glass slippers, which the prince took up most carefully. She got home, but quite out of breath, and in her nasty clothes, having nothing left of all but her finery, but one of the little slippers followed too that she dropped. What the hell? I'll try to read that again. She left behind her glass slippers, which the prince took up most carefully. She got home but quite out of breath, and in her nasty old clothes, having nothing left her of all her finery but of one little slippers, fellow to that she dropped. The guards at the palace gate were asked if they had not seen a princess go out, who said they had seen nobody go out but a young girl, very meanly dressed, and who had moved the air of a poor country wench than a gentlewoman. When the two sisters returned from the ball, Cinderella asked them, I know, right? But I guess that sentence was just saying that she had nothing left but the glass slipper because she's once again dressed in her like ragged clothes rather than the magnificent dress she wore at the ball. Old language, it's so confusing. They told her, yes, but she hurried away immediately when it struck 12, and it was so much haste that she dropped one of her little glass slippers, the prettiest in the world, which the king's son had taken up, that he had done nothing but look at her all the time at the ball, and that most certainly he was very much in love with the beautiful person who owned the glass slipper. I mean, maybe in the past she might as well be naked if she looked like that in the ball, because everyone was dressed nicely. What they said was very true, for a few days after the king's son caused it to be proclaimed, by sound of trumpets, that he would marry her whose foot this slipper would just fit. They whom he employed began to try it upon the princesses, then the duchesses, and all the court, but in vain. It was brought to the two sisters, who did all they possibly could to thrust their foot into the slipper, but they could not effect it. Cinderella, who saw all this, and knew her slipper, said to them laughing, Let me see if it will not fit me." Her sisters burst out a-laughing, and began to banter her. The gentleman who was sent to try the slipper looked earnestly at Cinderella, and finding her very handsome, said, Um, I go to my channel and then press like the camera icon, and there will be um an option to go live, but after pressing that, you still have to do some things. Like if it's a scheduled stream, you have to set up stuff, but if you're planning to go live immediately, then I guess you just have to do it. Oh, that's very nice. I also want to upload more like regular videos too, but for now I'm live streaming. It was just but ah it was but just that she could try, and that he had orders to let everyone make trial. He obliged Cinderella to sit down, and putting the slippers to her foot, he found it went very easily. He found it went on very easily, and fitted her as if it had been made of wax. The astonishment of her two sisters were in as excessively great, but still abundantly greater, when Cinderella pulled out of her pocket the other slipper, and put it on her foot. Thereupon in came her godmother, who, having touched with her wand, Cinderella's clothes made them richer and more magnificent than any of those she had before. And now her two sisters found her to be that fine, beautiful lady whom they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet to beg pardon for all the ill treatment they had made her undergo. Cinderella took them up, and, as she embraced them, cried that she forgave them with all her heart, and desired them always to love her. She was conducted to the young prince, dressed as she was. He thought her more charming than ever, and, a few days after, married her. Cinderella, who was no less good than beautiful, gave her two sisters lodgings in the palace, and the very same day matched them with two great lords of the court. The end. That's actually a very nice version of the Cinderella. I was expecting it to end like one of the more darker versions where the sisters had to slice up parts of their feet to fit the glass slipper and then have their eyes gouged out by the end, because that's one of the versions that I know. It was very nice. Cinderella was really very kind in this version. So I think that was our third story of the night. And that makes it the sixth story of the Blue Fairy book. We have like 14 stories to go. Not that I will read everything tonight, but just like trying to remind myself how much story we have left. It's been very fun, even though it's quite difficult sometimes because, you know, the way it's written is so old that I can't understand sometimes what I'm reading. Anyway, let's move on to the next story. Oh, there's another classic. It's been all classic stories. Like last time, I think I only knew one story out of the four that I read. Hello! Hello again! This time, the story is Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. I don't really know any other versions of Aladdin aside from the Disney version. Scary stories next time, sure. But I need to pick a story that's okay to read because I don't want Mama YouTube to be angry. Anyway, let's start the new story. Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. There once lived a poor tailor who had a son called Aladdin, a careless, idle boy who would do nothing but play all day long in the streets with little idle boys like himself. Ooh, maybe. This so grieved the father that he died. Wow, that was that was instant 180. Can I go where? Yet, in spite of his mother's tears and prayers, Aladdin did not mend his ways. One day, when he was playing in the streets as usual, a stranger asked him his age. Yeah, go where? And if he was not the son of Mustafa the tailor. I am, sir, replied Aladdin. But he died a long while ago. On this, the stranger, who was a famous African magician, fell on his neck and kissed him, saying, I am your uncle, and knew you from your likeness to my brother. Go to your mother and tell her I am coming. Aladdin ran and told his mother of his newly found uncle. Indeed, child, said she said, your father had a brother, but I always thought he was dead. However, she prepared supper and bade Aladdin seek his uncle, who came laden with wine and fruit. He presently fell down and kissed the place where Mustafa used to sit, bidding Aladdin's mother not to be surprised at not having seen him before, as he had been 40 years out of the country. He then turned to Aladdin and asked him for his trade, at which the boy hung his head while his mother burst into tears. On learning that Aladdin was idle and would learn no trade, he offered to take a shop for him and stock it with merchandise. Next day, he bought Aladdin a fine suit of clothes and took him all over the city, showing him the sights, and brought him home at nightfall to his mother, who was overjoyed to see his son so fine. Next day, the magician led Aladdin into some beautiful gardens a long way outside the city gates. They sat down by a fountain, and the magician pulled a cake from his girdle, which he divided between them. They then journeyed onwards till they almost reached the mountains. Aladdin was so tired that he begged to go back, but the magician beguiled him with pleasant stories and led him on in spite of himself. At last they came to two mountains divided by a narrow valley. We will go no farther, said the false uncle. False uncle? So this is not Mustafa's brother. I will show you something wonderful. Only do you gather up sticks while I kindle a fire. When it was lit, the magician threw on it a powder he had about him. At the same time, saying some magical words, the earth trembled a little and opened in front of them, disclosing a square flat stone with a brass ring in the middle. Um, I'm not sure. I think Alibaba is also Aladdin in some versions. I don't know. Aladdin tried to run away, but the magician caught him and gave him a blow that knocked him down. "What have I done, uncle?" he said piteously, whereupon the magician said more kindly, "Fear nothing, but obey me. Beneath this beneath this stone lies a treasure which is to be yours, and no one else may touch it. So you must do exactly as I tell you." At the word treasure, Aladdin forgot his fears and grasped the ring as he was told, saying the names of his father and grandfather. The stone came up quite easily, and some steps appeared. "Go down," said the magician. "At the foot of those steps you will find an open door leading into 3 large halls. Tuck up your gown and through them without touching anything, or you will die instantly. These halls lead into a garden of fine fruit trees. Walk on till you come to a niche in a terrace where stands a lighted lamp. Pour out the oil it contains and bring it to me." He drew a ring from his finger and gave it to Aladdin, bidding him prosper. Aladdin found everything as the magician had said, gathered some fruits off the trees, and, having got the lamp, arrived at the mouth of the cave. The magician cried out in a great hurry, "Make haste and give me the lamp." This Aladdin refused to do until he was out of the cave. The magician flew into a terrible passion, and throwing out some of more powder onto the fire, he said something, and the stone rolled back into its place. The magician left Persia forever, which plainly showed that he was no uncle of Aladdin's, but a cunning magician who had read in his magic books of a wonderful lamp, which would make him the most powerful man in the world, though he alone knew where to find it. He could only receive it from the hand of another. He had picked out the foolish Aladdin for this purpose, intending to get the lamp and kill him afterwards. For 2 days Aladdin remained in the dark, crying and lamenting. At last he clasped his hands in prayer, and in doing so rubbed the ring, which the magician had forgotten to take from him. Immediately an enormous and frightful genie rose up of the earth, saying, "What wouldst thou with me? I am the slave of the ring, and will only obey thee in all things." Aladdin fearlessly replied, "Deliver me from this place." Whereupon the earth opened, and he found himself outside. As soon as his eyes could bear the light, he went home, but fainted on the threshold. When he came to himself, he told his mother what had passed, and showed her a lamp and the fruits he gathered in the garden, which were in reality precious stones. He then asked for some food. "Alas, child," she said, "I have nothing in the house, but I have spun a little cotton and will go to sell it." Aladdin bade her keep her cotton, for he would sell the lamp instead. As it was very dirty, she began to rub it, that it might fetch a higher price. Instantly a hideous genie appeared, and asked what she would have. She fainted away, But Aladdin, snatching the lamp, said boldly, "Fetch me something to eat." The genie returned with a silver bowl, 12 silver plates containing rich meats, 2 silver cups, and 2 bottles of wine. Aladdin's mother, when she came to herself, said, "Whence comes this splendid feast?" "Ask not, but eat," replied Aladdin. So they sat at breakfast till it was dinner time, and Aladdin told her mother about the lamp. She begged him to sell it, and have nothing to do with devils. "No," said Aladdin, "since chance hath made us aware of its virtues, we will use it, and the ring likewise, which I shall always wear on my finger." When they had eaten all the genie had brought Aladdin, Aladdin sold one of the silver plates, and so on until none were left. He then had recourse to the genie, who gave him another set of plates, and thus they lived for many years. Ooh. One day, Aladdin heard an order from the Sultan proclaimed that everyone was to stay at home and close his shutters while the princess, his daughter, went out and from the bath. Aladdin was seized by desire to see her face, which was very difficult, as she always went veiled. He hid himself behind the door of the bath and peeped through a chink. "Oh no, man, you shouldn't do that." The princess lifted her veil as she went in, and looked so beautiful that Aladdin fell in love with her at first sight. He went home so changed that his mother was frightened. He told her he loved the princess so deeply that he could not live without her, and meant to ask her hand in marriage of her father. His mother, on hearing this, burst out laughing, but Aladdin at last prevailed upon her to go before the Sultan and carry his request. She fetched a napkin and laid it in the magic fruits from the enchanted garden, which sparkled and shone like the most beautiful eyes. She took this with her to please the Sultan, and set out trusting in the lamp. The Grand Vizier and lords of the council had just gone in as she entered the hall, and placed herself in front of the Sultan. He, however, took no notice of her. She went every day of the week and stood in the same place. When the council broke up on the 6th day, the Sultan said to his vizier, "I see a certain woman in the audience chamber every day, carrying something in a napkin. Call her next time, and I may find out what she wants." Next day, at a sign from the vizier, she went up to the foot of the throne, and remained kneeling till the Sultan said to her, "Rise, good woman, and tell me what you want." She hesitated, so the Sultan sent away all but the vizier, and bade her speak freely, promising to forgive her beforehand for anything she might say. She then told him of her son's violent love for the princess. "I pray him forget her," she said, but in vain. He threatened to do some desperate deed if I refused to go and ask your majesty for the hand of the princess. Now I pray you to forgive me, to forgive not me alone, but my son Aladdin." The Sultan asked her kindly what she had in her napkin, whereupon she unfolded the jewels and presented them. He was thunderstruck, and turning to the vizier, said, "What sayest thou?" Ought I not bestow the princess on one of who values her at such a price? The vizier, who wanted her for his own son, begged the sultan to withhold her for 3 months, in the course of which he hoped his son would contrive to make him richer. Would wait, let me read that again. Of which he hoped his son would contrive to make him a richer present. The sultan granted this, and told Aladdin's mother that, though he consented to the marriage, she must not appear before him again for 3 months. Aladdin waited patiently for nearly 3 months, but after 2 had elapsed, his mother, going into the city to buy oil, found everyone rejoicing, and asked what was going on. "Do you not know?" was the answer. "The son of the Grand Vizier is to marry the Sultan's daughter tonight." Breathless, she ran and told Aladdin, who was overwhelmed at first, but presently bethought him of the lamp. He rubbed it, and when the genie appeared, saying, "What is thy will?" Aladdin replied, "The Sultan, as thou knowest, has broken his promise to me, and the vizier's son is to have the princess." In this version, he has. In this version, he's not the one trying to marry Jasmine. "My command is that tonight you bring hither the bride and bridegroom." "Master, I obey," said the genie. Aladdin then went to his chamber, where, sure enough, at midnight, the genie transported the bed containing the vizier's son and the princess. "Take this new married man," he said, "and put him outside in the cold, and return at daybreak." Whereupon the genie took the vizier's son out of the bed, leaving Aladdin with the princess. "Fear nothing," Aladdin said to her. "You are my wife, promised to me by your unjust father, and no harm shall come to you." The princess was too frightened to speak, and passed the most miserable night of her life. Oof, Aladdin boy. Why are you not best boy in this story? While Aladdin lay down beside her, slept soundly. At the appointed hour, the genie fetched in the shivering bridegroom, laid him in his place, and transported the bed back to the palace. Presently, the sultan came to wish his daughter good morning. The unhappy vizier's son jumped up and hid himself, while the princess would not say a word, and was very sorrowful. The sultan sent her mother to her, who said, "How come it, child, that you will not speak to your father? What has happened?" The princess sighed deeply at the last and at last told her mother how, during the night, the bed had been carried into some strange house, and what had passed there. Her mother did not believe her in the least, but bade her rise and consider it an idle dream. The following night exactly the same thing happened, and next morning, on the princess refusing to speak, the sultan threatened to cut off her head. She then confessed all, bidding him ask the vizier's son if it were not so. The sultan told the vizier to ask his son, who owed the who owed the truth. That adding that, dearly as he loved the princess, he had rather die than go through another such fearful night, and wished to be separated from her. His wish was granted, and there was an end of feasting and rejoicing. When the 3 months were over, Aladdin sent his mother to remind the sultan of his promise. She stood in the same place as before, and the sultan, who had forgotten Aladdin, at once remembering him, and sent for her. On seeing her poverty, the sultan felt less inclined than ever to keep his word. and asked the vizier's advice, who counseled him to set so high a value on the princess that no man living could come up to it. The sultan then turned to Aladdin's mother, saying, "Good woman, a sultan must remember his promises, and I will remember mine. But your son must first send me 40 basins of gold brimful of jewels, carried by 40 black slaves." Oh my gosh! "Led by as many as white ones, splendidly dressed." Oh my god! Oh my god. I mean, this was how things were. "Tell him that I await his answer." The mother of Aladdin bowed low and went home, thinking all was lost. She gave Aladdin the message, adding, "He may wait long enough for your answer." "Not so long, mother, as you think," her son replied. "I would do a great deal more than that for the princess. Excuse me." He summoned the genie, and in a few moments the 80 slaves arrived and filled up the small house and garden. Aladdin made them set out to the palace, two and two, followed by his mother. They were so richly dressed, with such splendid jewels in their girdles, that everyone crowded to see them, and the basins of gold they carried on their heads. They entered the palace, and, after kneeling before the sultan, stood in half circle round the throne with their arms crossed, while Aladdin's mother presented them to the sultan. He hesitated no longer, but said, "Good woman, return and tell your son that I will wait for him with open arms." She lost no time in telling Aladdin, bidding him to make haste. But Aladdin first called the genie. "I want a scented bath," he said, "a richly embroidered habit, a horse surpassing the sultan's, and 20 slaves to attend me. Besides this, oh my god, 6 slaves beautifully dressed to wait on my mother, and lastly 10,000 pieces of gold in 10 purses." No sooner said than done. Aladdin mounted his horse and passed through the streets, with slaves strewing gold as they went. Those who played with him in his childhood knew him not. He had grown so handsome. When the sultan saw him, he came down from his throne, embraced him, and led him into the hall, where a feast was spread, intending to marry him to the princess that very day. But Aladdin refused, saying, "I must build a palace fit for her," and took his leave. Once home, he said to the genie, "Build me a palace of the finest marble, set with jasper, agate, and other precious stones. In the middle you shall build me a large hall with a dome, its 4 walls of massy gold and silver, each side 6 windows, whose lattices, all except one, which is to be left unfinished, must be set with diamonds and rubies. There must be stables and horses and grooms and slaves, and go see about it." Whew. The palace was finished by next day. The genie carried him there and showed him all his orders faithfully carried out, even to laying off a velvet carpet from Aladdin's palace to the sultan's. Aladdin's mother then dressed herself carefully and walked to the palace with her slaves, while he followed her on horseback. The sultan sent musicians with trumpets and cymbals to meet them, so that the air resounded with music and cheers. She was taken to the princess, who saluted her and treated her with great honor. At night, the princess said goodbye to her father and set out on the carpet for Aladdin's palace, with his mother at her side, and followed by the hundred slaves. She was charmed at the sight of Aladdin, who ran to receive her. "Princess," he said, "blame your beauty for my boldness if I have displeased you." She told him that, having seen him, she willingly obeyed her father in this matter. After the wedding had taken place, Aladdin led her into the hall, where a feast was spread, and she supped with him, after which they danced till midnight. Next day, Aladdin invited the Sultan to see the palace. On entering the hall with the 24 windows, with their rubies and diamonds and emeralds, he cried, "It is a wonder, it is a world's wonder. There is only one thing that surprises me. Was it by accident that one window was left unfinished?" "No, sir, by design," returned Aladdin. "I wish your majesty to have the glory of finishing this palace." Aladdin's got big brain. The Sultan was pleased and sent for the best jewelers in the city. He showed them the unfinished window and bade them to fit it up like the others. "Sir," replied the spokesman, "we cannot find jewels enough." The Sultan had his own fetched, which they soon used, but to no purpose, for in a month's time the work was not half done. Aladdin, knowing that their task was vain, bade them undo their work and carry the jewels back. And the genie finished the window at his command. The Sultan was surprised to receive his jewel again, and visited Aladdin, who showed him the window finished. The Sultan embraced him, the envious vizier, meanwhile hinting that it was the work of enchantment. Aladdin had won the hearts of the people by his gentle bearing. He was made captain of the Sultan's armies, and won several battles for him, but remained modest and courteous as before, and lived thus in peace and content for several years. But far away in Africa, the magician remembered Aladdin, and by his magic arts discovered that Aladdin, instead of perishing miserably in the caves, had escaped and had married a princess, with whom he was living in great honor and wealth. He knew that the poor tailor's son could only have accomplished this by means of the lamp, and traveled night and day till he reached the capital of China, bent on Aladdin's ruin. As he passed through the town, he heard people talking everywhere about a marvelous palace. "Forgive my ignorance," he asked. "What is this place you speak of? Have you not heard of Prince Aladdin's palace?" was the reply. "The great wonder of the world? I will direct you if you have a mind to see it." The magician thanked him who spoke, and having seen the palace, knew that it had been raised by the genie of the lamp, and became half mad with rage. He determined to get hold of the lamp, and again plunged Aladdin into the deepest poverty. Unlucky, Aladdin had gone a-hunting for 8 days, which gave the magician plenty of time. He bought a dozen copper lamps and put them into a basket, and went to the palace, crying, "New lamps, put them wait, new lamps for old," followed by a jeering crowd. The princess, sitting in the hall of 24 windows, sent a slave to find out what the noise was about, who came back laughing, so that the princess scolded her. "Madam," replied the slave, "who can help laughing to see an old fool offering exchange fine new lamps for old ones?" Another slave, hearing this, said, "There is an old one in the cornice there which he can have. Now this was the magic lamp, which Aladdin had left there, as he could not take it out hunting with him. The princess, not knowing its value, laughingly bade to the slave, "Take it and make the exchange." Wait, let me drink some water. Now where am I? Ah, she went and said to the magician, "Give me a new lamp for this." He snatched it and bade the slave to make her choice, amid the jeers of the crowd. Little he cared, but left off crying his lamps, and went out of the city gates to a lonely place, where he remained till nightfall, when he pulled out the lamp and rubbed it. The genie appeared at the magician's command, carried him, together with the palace and the princess in it, to let me read that again. The genie appeared at the magician's command, carried him, together with the palace and the princess in it, to a lonely place in Africa. Next morning, the sultan looked out the window towards Aladdin's palace and rubbed his eyes, for it was gone. He sent for the vizier and asked what had become of the palace. The vizier looked out too, and was lost in astonishment. He again put it down to enchantment, and this time the sultan believed him, and sent 30 men on horseback to fetch Aladdin in chains. They met him riding home, bound him, and forced him to go with them on foot. The people, however, who loved him, followed on to see that he came to no harm. He was carried before to the sultan, who ordered the executioner to cut his head. The executioner made Aladdin kneel down, bandaged his eyes, and raised his scimitar to strike. At the instant, the vizier, who saw that the crowd had forced their way into the courtyard and were scaling the walls to rescue Aladdin, called the executioner to stay his hand. The people indeed looked so threatening that the sultan gave way and ordered Aladdin to be unbound and pardoned him in the sight of the crowd. Aladdin now begged to know what he had done. "False wench," said the sultan, "come hither," and showed him from the window of the palace where his palace had stood. Aladdin was so amazed that he could not say a word. "Where is my palace and my daughter?" demanded the sultan. For the first, I am not so deeply concerned, but my daughter I must have, and you must find her, or lose your head." Aladdin begged for 40 days. Ooh, this is where the 40 days comes in which to find her, promising that if he failed to return and suffer death at the sultan's pleasure, his prayer was granted, and he went forth sadly from the sultan's presence. For 3 days he wandered about like a madman, asking everyone what had become of his palace, but they only laughed and pitied him. He came to the banks of a river, and knelt down to say his prayer before throwing himself in. In doing so, he rubbed the magic ring he still wore. The genie he had seen in the cave appeared, and asked his will. "Save my life, genie," said Aladdin, "and bring my palace back." "That is not in my power," said the genie. "I am only the slave of the ring. You must ask him for the lamp." "Even so," said Aladdin, "but thou canst take me to the palace and set me down under my dear wife's window." He at once found himself in Africa, under the window of the princess, and fell asleep out of sheer weariness. He awakened by the singing of the birds, and his heart was lighter. He saw plainly that all his misfortunes were owing to the loss of the lamp. and vainly wondered who had robbed him of it. That morning the princess rose earlier than she had done since she had been carried to Africa by the magician, whose company she was forced to endure once a day. She, however, treated him so harshly that he dared not live there altogether. She was dressing. One of her women looked out and saw Aladdin. The princess ran and opened the window, and at the noise she made Aladdin look up. She called to him to come to her, and great was the joy of these lovers at seeing each other again. After he had kissed her, Aladdin said, "I beg of you, princess, in God's name, before we speak of anything else, for your own sake and mine, tell me what has become of an old lamp I left in the cornice of the hall of 24 windows when I went a-hunting." "Alas," she said, "I am the innocent cause of your sorrows," and told him of the exchange of the lamp. "Now I know," cried Aladdin, "that we have to thank the African magician for this. Where is the lamp?" "He carries it about with him," said the princess. "I know, for he pulled it out of his breast to show me. He wishes me to break my faith with you and marry him, saying that you were beheaded by my father's command. He is forever speaking ill of you, but I only reply by my tears. If I persist, I doubt not but he will use violence." Aladdin comforted her and left her for a while. He changed clothes with the first person he met in town, and having bought a certain powder, returned to the princess, who let him in by a little side door. "Put out your most beautiful dress," he said to her, "and receive the magician with smiles, leading him to believe that you have forgotten me. Invite him to sup with you, and say that you wish to taste the wine of his country. He will go for some, and while he is gone, I will tell you what to do." She listened carefully to Aladdin, and when he left her, arrayed herself gaily for the first time since she left China. She put on a girdle and headdress of diamonds, and seeing a glass that she was more beautiful than ever, received the magician, saying, "To this great amazement, I have made up my mind that Aladdin is dead, and that all my tears will not bring him back to me. So I am resolved to mourn no more, and have therefore invited you to sup with me. But I am tired of the wines of China, and I would fain taste those of Africa." The magician flew to his cellar, and the princess put the powder Aladdin had given her in her cup. When he returned, she asked him to drink her health in the wine of Africa, handing him her cup in exchange for his. As a sign, she was reconciled to him. Before drinking, the magician made a speech in praise of her beauty, but the princess cut him short, saying, "Let us drink first, and you shall say what you will afterwards." She set her cup to her lips and kept it there, while the magician drained his to the dregs and fell back lifeless. The princess opened the door to Aladdin and flung her arms around his neck, but Aladdin put her away, bidding her leave him, as he had more to do. He then went to the dead magician, took the lamp out of his vest, and bade the genie carry the palace and all in it back to China. This was done. The princess in her chamber only felt 2 little shocks, and little thought she was at home again. The sultan, who was sitting in his closet, mourning for his lost daughter, happened to look out and rubbed his eyes, for there stood the palace as before. He hastened thither, and Aladdin received him in the hall of 24 windows, with the princess at his side. Aladdin told him what had happened, and showed him the dead body of the magician, he might believe. that he might believe. A 10 days feast was proclaimed, and it seemed as if Aladdin might now live the rest of his life in peace. But it was not to be. The African magician had a younger brother. Oh my god, this is another long short story. It just keeps going. Who was, if possible, more wicked and more cunning than himself. He traveled to China to avenge his brother's death, and went to visit a pious woman called Fatima, thinking she might be of use to him. He entered her cell and clapped a dagger to her breast, telling her to rise and do his bidding on pain of death. Yeah, 101 Arabian Nights. Arabian Nights. Oh, maybe I can't sing that. He changed clothes with her, colored his face like hers, put on her veil, and murdered. Oh, this story just keeps just going to 100 or 180. Suddenly the father dies, suddenly the magician's dead, and suddenly Fatima is dead. That she might tell no tales. Then he went towards the palace of Aladdin, and all the people, thinking he was the holy woman, gathered round, kissing his hand and begging his blessing. When he got to the palace, there was such noise going. Oh, well, we're about to end it. On round him, that princess bade her slave to look out of the window and ask what was the matter. Once again, this princess is about to cause trouble. The slave said it was the holy woman, curing people by her touch of their ailments. Whereupon the princess, who had long desired to see Fatima, sent for her. On coming to the princess, the magician offered a prayer for her health and prosperity. When he had done, the princess made him sit by her, and begged him to stay with her always. The false Fatima, who wished nothing better, consented, but kept his veil down for fear of discovery. The princess showed him the hall, and asked him what he thought of it. "It is truly beautiful," said the false Fatima. "In my mind it wants but one thing." "And what is that?" said the princess. "If only Roc's egg," replied he, "were hung up from the middle of this dome, it would be the wonder of the world." After this, the princess could think of nothing but Roc's egg. And when Aladdin returned from hunting, he found her in a very ill humor. He begged to know what was amiss, and she told him that all her pleasures in the hall was spoilt for the want of Roc's egg hanging from the dome. "If that is all," replied Aladdin, "you shall soon be happy." He left her, rubbed the lamp, and when the genie appeared, commanded to bring a Roc's egg. The genie gave such a loud and terrible shriek at the hall that the hall shook. "Wretch," he cried, "it is not enough that I have done everything for you, but you must command me to bring my master and hang him up the midst of this dome? You and your wife and your palace deserve to be burnt to ashes. But that this request does not come from you, but from the brother of the African magician, whom you destroyed. He is now in your palace disguised as the holy woman, whom he murdered. It was who put that wish into your wife's head. Take care of yourself, for he means to kill you." So saying this, the genie disappeared. Aladdin went back to the princess, saying his head ached, and requesting that the holy Fatima should be fetched to lay her hands on it. But when the magician came near, Aladdin, seizing the dagger, pierced him to the heart. "What have you done?" cried the princess. "You have killed the holy woman." "Not so," replied Aladdin, "but a wicked magician," and told her of how she had been deceived. After this, Aladdin and his wife lived in peace, succeeded the sultan when he died, and reigned for many years, leaving behind a long line of kings. The end. Boy, I thought that was gonna end like the last story, last reading stream, where like it wasn't a happy ending because the couple died and the yellow dwarf was happy in a twisted way. But yeah, that was Aladdin and the what was it? Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. The genie in the lamp was kind enough to like let him know that, hey, you're gonna kill yourself. Yeah, everyone died in the final story last stream. I mean, not really everyone died, but you know, the main couple died. I don't remember if the mother died. But yeah. How was my reading? I think it was better than last time. Also, the setup. Once again, I got this background from uh Peak what was it? Anyway, it's in the description. It's by dankalaning or dankalaning. That was the uh artist that was credited on the background artwork. Yeah. I mean, this is like bedtime stories. And the ambience music, I got them from Pixabay or Pixabay. I don't really know how to read the site's name. And the the credits are also there in the description. Even the glasses that I'm wearing and the book that I'm holding. Oh, it does? Well, I'll try to figure out what happens when that happens. Maybe it's because I don't know. I'll check my wirings for the next stream. Or maybe that's like my hair brushing because I'm actually quite near the mic because I need to uh go near the screen because the font is kind of small for this book that I'm reading. And once again, I get confused with some of the sentences because it's like in old language. Not really archaic, but people don't speak like that anymore. I wonder if people really did speak like that back then. Yeah, I'm already wearing my glasses, but I still have to come close just to make sure that I'm reading it right. Because like I feel like I'm reading it more properly if I'm closer to the words. Yeah, this has been The Little Red Riding Hood, Sleeping Beauty and the Wooden in the Woods, Cinderella or the Glass Slipper, and Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. If I make it small, then I will have to scroll up and down when I read. I just let it be in its default size so I can see the whole page. So that reading is quite continuous. At least I try to be. Yeah. Thank you to everyone who joined the stream. I hope this has been a nice read for you. On my next stream, like next reading stream, maybe I will read a horror book instead of continuing the Blue Fairy book. But that's not to say that I won't be reading from this storybook compilation anymore. I'll just, change up some things. Anyways, tomorrow I am planning to uh stream Coral Island again. I've been missing that game. I've been wanting to get back to it. And then on Tuesday, I will do a drawing stream. Yay! Then on Wednesday, I don't really know what to do yet, but I think either on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, I might do the anime song karaoke stream. Those are my plans so far. I want to do the karaoke on the weekend so that I think it's okay to be loud rather than, being noisy on a weekday evening. But yeah. Also, I want to have time to practice. Unlike before where I just literally had one day before. I at least have a few days to get ready. But don't expect much because, I'm not a professional singer or anything. But yeah, I think I'll end the stream here. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. See you tomorrow. Good night. Bye. Good afternoon. Good morning. Good day. Good evening. Everything. Take care. Ingat. Mwah, 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 mwah. Choo, choo, choo.